Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalu salati wa atamu taslim ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. I want to welcome everyone back after the weekend to our continuation of our tafsir series. Alhamdulillah, we are continuing with the meanings of Surah Al-Ma'idah. One thing I wanted to address before we continue is that we did, alhamdulillah, receive a question. And it was, I think, prompted after we were speaking about how Christianity evolved and the true followers of Isa alayhi salam, who were upon Tawheed, were persecuted, while the other Trinity-based form of Christianity became the official state religion under Emperor Constantine after the Council of Nicaea was convened in 325 AD. So I think that prompted the question when we spoke about how the ones that were upon Tawheed, the real followers of Isa alayhi salam, how they were tortured and horrible things were done to them. So someone asked about the incident that is mentioned in Surah Al-Buruj about some group of believers historically that were actually killed or destroyed through burning. And so the question was that were these the people of Isa alayhi salam from that time? So actually, I looked up the tafsir of this, and for those of you who are wondering where we are, this is Surah Al-Buruj, verse number 4, which says, "Qutila ashabul ukhdud," destroyed were the people of the pits. The pits or the trenches or, the deep pits that were dug into the ground, actually to torture the believers, because this pit was actually lit with a fire into which the believers were thrown, the believers of that time. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually saying, "Qutila ashabul ukhdud," destroyed were the people of the pits, yani destroyed were the people who dug the pits and threw the believers into the pits of fire. So historically, unfortunately, this was a torture technique, a persecution technique used by tyrants in the past. Now, to pinpoint exactly who this particular verse is referring to, if you look at the tafsir, there are various reports and various events that are associated with this particular verse. And there is one report in the narration, from the narration of Imam Muslim, others report it as well, but of course Imam Muslim is the most authentic of those that report it. It is in Bukhari, but it is in Muslim, which is also authentic. So this report, out of the various ones that are associated with it, this is actually a narration from the authority of Suhaib al-Rumi from the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he said that there was a king who had a magician at his court, who on becoming old asked the king to appoint a boy who should learn magic from him. And some of you may already know the story, but just for the sake of completion, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to read the entire report. Accordingly, the king appointed a boy, but the boy, while going to the magician's place and coming back home, also started visiting on the way a monk who was probably a follower of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and being influenced by his teaching turned into a believer. So this boy that is now being trained by the court magician, since he is getting old and he wants to pass on his teachings of magic to someone who can replace him. So a boy is appointed for this purpose. But on his way to the magician, he meets a monk on the way. And the narration mentions that this monk was most likely a follower of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam. So he's most likely a Christian. And so this boy was influenced by his teaching and he turned into a believer. And that the narration continues, so much so that by his training, he acquired miraculous powers. He would heal the blind and cure the lepers. When the king came to know that the boy had believed in the unity of God, yani he was upon Tawheed, he first put the monk to the sword, then wanted to kill the boy. But no instrument and no device had any effect on him, yani on the boy. He wasn't getting killed by normal techniques that people are supposed to die through. At last the boy said to the king, if you are bent upon killing me, shoot an arrow at me with the word Bismi Rabbil Ghulam, but in the name of this boy's Lord, in front of the assembled people, and I shall die. So the boy was very smart. After the king's various techniques to have him killed failed, he said, if you really want to kill me, the only way you can kill me is if you gather all the people together in one place and then shoot an arrow. And when you shoot the arrow, you're going to say basically Bismillah, yani Bism in the name of the Ghulam, Rabb hadha al-Ghulam, right? Rabb al-Ghulam. So in the name of the Lord of this boy. In other words, Bismillah. And he said, that's the only way you're going to be able to kill me. The narration continues, the king did as he was told, and the boy died. Thereupon the people cried out that they affirmed faith in the Lord of the boy. The courtiers told the king that the same precisely had happened which he wanted to avoid. The people had forsaken his religion and the king's religion and adopted the boy's religion. When they saw that the only way the king could kill the boy is when he actually took the name of the boy's Lord, which means the boy had been upon the right religion. So they all converted. And they all became, in essence, followers of the teachings of Isa alayhi salam. At this, the king was filled with rage. Consequently, he got pits dug out along the roads, got them filled with fire, and ordered all those who refused to renounce the new faith to be thrown into the fire. So that's the end of the narration. Now, this seems like a perfect fit. But again, the narration doesn't explicitly mention it to be a tafsir of this verse. It's narrating a story that involved the digging of ditches for the persecution, ditches that were filled with fire for the persecution of the believers. Now, there's another report that actually seems to apply more here, since there's a lot of historical corroboration with the report that I'm about to narrate. So it seems like from the tafsir, this is Tafhim al-Quran, Mawdudi rahimahullah ta'ala. This is from his tafsir, and I do want you to consult the rest of his tafsir for more details. I only selected 2 of the various events that he mentions with regards to this verse from Surah Al-Buruj. I chose to mention the most authentic narration from Sahih Muslim, which mentions the persecution of believers in ditches, but it doesn't specifically say in the narration that this incident is the tafsir of this particular verse. So that kind of leaves the field open to looking at other reports as well. And so Mawdudi rahimahullah ta'ala, he actually chooses the report I'm about to share as the more historically applicable report for this verse. Wallahu alam, and Allah knows best. But I'm going to just narrate what he gives us the most historically applicable report to this verse. He writes, the best known event, however, relates to Najran, which has been related by Ibn Hisham, Tabari, Ibn Khaldun, and he mentions others. It resumes, its resume is as follows, yani it is as follows. Tuban Asad Abu Karib, king of Yemen, went to Medina once, where he embraced Judaism under the influence of the Jews, and brought 2 of the Jewish scholars of Banu Qurayza, that was one of the Jewish tribes. He brought them with him to Yemen. There he propagated Judaism widely. His son, this is the part to pay attention to, his son Dhu Nuwas succeeded him, and he came after this king who had adopted Judaism, had become a Jew. So his son Dhu Nuwas was also obviously Jewish now. He came after him and he attacked Najran, which was a stronghold of the Christians in southern Arabia, because he wanted to eliminate Christianity and make the people accept Judaism. So Ibn Hisham says that these people were the true followers of the gospel of the Injil of Isa alayhi salam. So in Najran, he invited the people, this Dhu Nuwas, the son, invited the people to accept Judaism, but they refused to obey. Thereupon, he caused a large number of the people to be burnt in ditches of fire and killed many others with the sword until he had killed nearly 20,000 of them. So this report seems, because of other historical reasons that you can read for yourself in Tafhim al-Quran, will give you a better idea of why this seems to be the more applicable report for this particular verse, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, just toward the people of the pits or the ditches. Wallahu ta'ala alam. At the end of the day, Allah, of course, knows best. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. And with that, we will continue now with our tafsir of Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 79. Okay, so since we had the weekend gap, if you don't remember what we talked about last week, we had spoken about the Bani Israel who had been cursed by their prophets, namely Dawood alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. Those are the mentioned prophets that cursed Bani Israel because of what they used to do habitually of sin and transgression. Now, one of their worst characteristics where they fell short in upholding the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, we spoke about the two extremes. In both ways are a disservice to the deen and are not following the dictates, commands, and teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is ifrat and tafrit. Ifrat is going to excess, going above and beyond what is mandated and revealed, like the Christians did when it came to Isa alayhi salam. They turned him into a god or son of God, attributed divinity to him and did not keep him at his level of a prophet. So that is called ifrat, going to excess. You'll find this term in books of tafsir, and if you read Arabic, or tafrit, which is falling short, which is to not fulfill the mandated required minimums of the deen, of those things that are compulsory, those things that are fara'id, those things that are mandatory to do. So one of the things that the Bani Israel fell horribly short in, where they fell into tafrit, into falling short of upholding what was necessary, was that they used to not forbid the evil. And this is what is mentioned in verse 79. كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوا لبئس ما كانوا يفعلون. Verse 79 says, they did not forbid each other from committing the abominable deeds they committed. Evil indeed was what they did. Okay, so there's actually a narration from Sayyid Qutb, tafsir fi Dhilal al-Quran, in the shade of the Quran, which actually is of disputed authenticity. Generally, as you know, we report from Bukhari and Muslim. This report is considered weak by Shaykh al-Albani, but Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala, he considers it Hasan, and it is from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad on the authority of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. So with that background, I thought I would share it with you, where Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu quotes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as saying, when the children of Israel began to commit sin, their scholars counseled them, yani advised them to desist, but they continued in their wrong ways. Their scholars nevertheless continued to mix socially with them and to eat and drink with them. God caused one group of them to stand against another, and they were cursed by David and Jesus, son of Mary. That was because they rebelled and persisted in their transgression. Then this verse is mentioned, verse 78, that we had mentioned last time. The Prophet was reclining when he said this, and at this point he sat up and said, "No, by him who holds my soul in his hand, you must push them to follow the truth." Okay, so this is a very insightful narration, is that the community being overtaken by sin is not something that happens in an instant. It is a gradual process, and it can only succeed, yani the corruption of a society can only occur when its immune system stops doing the duty that it is supposed to do. The immune system of the community are its ulama, are its religious scholars, are its those that have been endowed with religious knowledge and insight, who intimately know the words and commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are aware of what pleases him, what displeases him, what he has forbidden, what he has mandated. When these people, who are the immune system of the community, that through their exhortations are supposed to control the amount of fawahish and evil and transgressions that is allowed to take place, when they fall short of their assigned duty, then you have the beginning formation of a corrupt society. And so, yes, the narration mentions they did used to forbid them from evil initially, right? They would tell them to stop. But what did they do when the people didn't stop? They would continue mixing with them socially. They would continue attending social gatherings. They continued eating and drinking with them. What is the message that that type of interaction sends to those people that are involved in haram, that are involved in wrongdoing, that are involved in sin and transgression against Allah? That, yeah, they did tell us to stop. Yeah, it's something that, we shouldn't do, but hey, they're still interacting with us. They're mixing with us. They're coming to our parties. They're coming to our gatherings. They're okay to be with us and to hang out with us. So really, the sin can't be that bad, or things are not really going to drastically change for us. We're not going to be like socially boycotted, even if we continue to commit this haram. So this is actually an emboldening of the sin and the attitude of sin among those committing it, when those that are supposed to be the most active and effective in countering that sin through their admonitions, when they themselves become complacent. And this is a great shame and a great failing on the ulama, on the religious scholars, a real betrayal of the legacy of their prophets, and an incredible ingratitude to the revelation scripture that they take pride in bearing and having received. So this was one of the worst deeds that they fell into after knowing the sinfulness of an act, because what this does is that it allows that sin or those sins to become pervasive in society until they become the norm. And once they become the norm, then you have succeeded in forming a corrupt society in which there is no regard for the word of God, where God has no place, where God does not legislate in the lives of people, where his word does not matter. Then what will happen to such a society except that it shall become removed from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That really is the meaning of la'na. La'an, the fact that Dawood and Isa alayhi salam cursed Bani Israel. What is that curse? That curse is really removal from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that happens because of the actions they chose to commit and persist in. Now, to save ourselves from such a horrible end, again, we want to apply these lessons to ourselves. Do we see friends around us that are doing inappropriate things? Do we see family members doing something that is haram or questionable? It might not be haram, it might be makruh, it might be questionable. Do we stay silent or do we speak out? And now, since we're all home, where are we interacting with our friends? We're interacting with them on social media. We are interacting with them on Snapchat and other forums. When we see something wrong on Snapchat, when we see something inappropriate, haram, in our forum, when someone says something, comments laughingly or jokingly about something that is inappropriate, that is haram, that would be displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do you type in a laughing emoji, or do you speak out? Do you stay silent, or do you say something to discourage that from becoming the norm? We are as responsible for what we type on Snapchat and other social media forums as we are for the words we utter live in public in real life interactions, because they have the same weight. They are completely attributed to you. You are doing it deliberately. They're the same things as live conversations. And your parents, for those of you that are younger, they will not always be watching out for you. They will not always be logging into your Snapchat. They will not always find out what you do. But the angels are recording it. And this is what we have to be cognizant of, is that it is my job to, first of all, make sure I don't do anything wrong. And if I see something wrong, I have to speak out. Otherwise, I become part of that sin. I become a shareholder in the in that sin itself. So this is very, very serious. And to save ourselves from such a horrible end of being complacent, of bringing on eventual corruption of that Snapchat text, of that society, of whatever capacity that we are involved in, there are various levels of resistance you must actively engage in to rid the society, to rid the Snapchat, to rid the social media of that evil, of that wrong, to speak up against it, or at least consider it unacceptable in your heart. And that's when you don't have the power to say anything. But that is not true in the case of friends. In the case of social media, we are able to speak up. And this is actually from an authentic narration in the Sahih of Imam Muslim on the authority of Abi Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu. He said, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. And you all know this narration. Whoever among you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. Yani get actively involved and make sure you put a stop and an end to that evil. And if he is unable to do so, then to do it with his tongue. If he's not able to physically stop it with his hand, if he doesn't have that type of power in that gathering or that group, then let him change it with his, speak out against it with his tongue. Must say something, cannot stay quiet, otherwise you become part of that sin. And if he's unable to do even that, this, like I said, does not apply to friends, but let's say in other larger circles, maybe where there is some danger to your life, or there are other risks and factors involved that prevent you from speaking out, then at least consider it evil in your heart. And that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentions is the weakest part of faith. Yani, at least you must do that. There cannot be anything less than that. The heart, in order to keep the heart alive, in order to keep its ability to recognize the truth, it must consider what is wrong as wrong, regardless of who is doing it and who is saying it. So not caring is not an option for a Muslim. Not caring about what other people are saying, what other people are doing, what other people, when there is corruption and evil and hurt and bullying, etc., not caring is not an option. No one can say it's not a big deal. Okay, the attitude of who cares is not something that a believer adopts at any point in her life. We do not remain quiet when we have the ability to exhort or say something, because that silence is the condemnable silence which brings about Allah's punishment. And even worse, this has become such a neglected part of our deen. It used to be something that was considered mandatory, and it is mandatory, just like the salah is mandatory, and not eating haram is mandatory, and the hajj and the zakah and the fasting is mandatory. The same way, commanding the good and forbidding the evil is a command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the believers. It is our duty. But unfortunately, the environment in our society encourages the exact opposite. It encourages us to mind our own business, to not be judgmental. And this is one of the greatest, most successful manipulative tricks of shaitan. It's a mental trick where he has associated commanding the good, forbidding the evil, as a statement of judging someone. So if I tell someone, you really shouldn't do this, it's not a good thing to do, or really should do this, why are you neglecting this? Don't judge me. And somehow that reaction of don't judge me has received validity and justification and acceptance in our society. Yes, only Allah knows the hearts. Yes, only Allah will judge you in the hereafter and send you to your final destination. No dispute about that. That does not negate our duty to remind each other. When someone, who are the most sincere people towards you? Generally, it is your parents. No one wants Jannah more for you than your parents do. No one is more sincere for us than our parents are, right? They're the ones who command us the most to good and forbid us the most from evil. Do we ever say to them, do we ever think they're judging us? No, because commanding the good and forbidding the evil comes from a place of sincerity, comes from a place of wanting khair and good and happiness, eternal happiness for the individual that you are reminding. And also to receive the same, if someone commands you to do good, if someone commands you to not perform an evil act, a wrong thing, then you should also accept that respectfully, graciously. This is an adab we are fast losing. It is something I really want all of us to pay a lot of attention to and to inculcate in our children, in our families, in our siblings, in our friends, is to not get offended if someone tells us the right thing, even if they're younger than us. We should always be able to, now of course with parents, we have to be very respectful and very careful, but generally, if our peer, if our sibling, even if they're younger, if our friend, even if they're younger, they tell us something and they are right, then this is something that we need to really take into consideration. Otherwise, what is going to happen? One of the worst consequences of neglecting this duty of commanding the good and forbidding the evil is that it eventually leads to even our du'as not being accepted. And I'm not making that up. This is actually from a narration from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and the isnad, the chain of transmission of this narration is considered correct. And it is on the authority of Hudayfa bin al-Yaman. And for those of you that were paying attention, you'll recall that this was the special Sahabi to whom the Prophet ﷺ had given the names of the hypocrites. So he knew the names of the hypocrites in Medina, and it was a secret of the Prophet ﷺ, and he did not disclose it to anyone, although other Sahaba wanted to find out who they were. But so it is this Sahabi radiallahu anh, that reports this particular narration, where he says that Nabiya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam قال, this is from the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِي لتأمرن بالمعروف ولتنهون عن المنكر أو ليوشكن الله أن يبعث عليكم عقابا من عندي ثم لا تدعنه فلا يستجيب لكم. Where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I swear by the one in whose hand is my soul, either you command good and forbid evil, or Allah will soon send upon you a punishment from him, then you will call upon him, but he will not respond to you. You know, some of us may have heard some nasheeds recently published about the current situation, and one of them speaks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with us, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with us, and this is why this punishment has come. And then the narration says that if we stop commanding the good and forbidding evil, a punishment will come and you will call upon him, but he will not respond to you. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stopped responding to someone's du'as is such a serious thing, because Allah normally is ever ready to respond. He is ever ready to, he's as-sami' al-qarib. We had talked about his quality, his sifa of being as-sami', the all-hearing, how he hears all the du'as of all of his servants. And he has commanded us to call upon him and has promised that he will answer our call. So that is the general rule. That is the general state of affairs, the norm. But when something happens to upset that norm, when something happens that throws the balance off of that norm, it is a serious warning, a red flag. A serious bell should go off that we are doing something that has normally taken away this quality of our prayers being answered, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responding to our prayers. And that is one of the consequences of not commanding good and forbidding evil. So it's not enough to simply desist from the sin yourself. It is just as important to encourage others from desisting. And I really want everyone to pay special attention to this. I cannot overemphasize this enough. Now that most of us are interacting through social media, please make sure you are the immune system of that social media. As Muslims, as young people, as believers, now you have learned that this is one of the fara'id, this is one of the mandatory deeds of our deen, commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Do not be duped into thinking that you are being judgmental. That's what our society at large would have us think, because it's so convenient to continue in your ways and label the other as judgmental. and not have to bear the responsibility of facing your actions and really checking whether they are right or wrong. And this is actually why there's so much wisdom in making this something that we must do as believers, command good and forbid the evil, because the person doing the wrong, or neglecting that which is mandatory or good, doesn't see it for him or herself. So they need an external reminder, because if they had that internally, then they wouldn't need that. But the fact that they are involved in a certain sin or neglecting something that is mandated, that means that they are in need of extra help, extra intervention. So this should be done respectfully. This should be done gently. It should be done in a way that is not embarrassing. It should be done in private. All of those adab of doing it, of course, must be very carefully adhered to for optimal results. But we, as Muslims in America, should never dismiss this as part of our duties as believers and part of checking that corruption. So a believer, to end this part, a believer is caring by nature. At no point do we stop caring about the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at no point do we stop caring about the ultimate end of our families and friends. We want all of us to go to Jannah together. We want to care about everybody. We want to care about ourselves. We want to care about others. And if we allow corruption to go unchecked, then we are all going to sink, because we are on this ship of life together. I'm just going to close with one narration from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is from the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, where he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, مثل القائم على حدود الله والواقع فيها كمثل قوم استهموا على سفينة فأصاب بعضهم أعلاها وبعضهم أسفلها فكان الذين في أسفلها إذا استقوا من الماء مروا على من فوقهم فقالوا لو أن خرقنا في نصيبنا خرقا ولم نؤذي من فوقنا فأن يتركوهم وما أرادوا هلكوا جميعا وإن أخذوا على أيديهم نجوا ونجوا جميعا. A beautiful, insightful, perfect narration for this topic, where the Rasul said, the parable of the one who observes the limits prescribed by Allah. What does it mean to observe the limits prescribed by Allah? To stop where Allah says stop, to go where Allah says go, to go and complete all of his fara'id, mandatory deeds, to stop and not commit any of the haram that he has forbidden. The parable of the one who observes the limits prescribed by Allah and the one who transgresses them is the likeness of people who board a ship after casting lots. Some of them are in its lower deck and others are in its upper deck. Those in the lower deck, when they need water, go to the upper deck and say, if we make a hole in the bottom of the ship, we will not harm you. If those in the upper deck leave them to carry out their plan, they will all be drowned. But if they stop them, then all of them will be safe. What an amazing parable. So those who didn't understand it, people boarded a ship. They cast lots as to see who's going to get the upper deck, who's going to get the lower deck. But every time the people who were in the lower deck needed to get water, they had to go upstairs to the upper deck. And then after a while, they thought, we're really bothering the people on the upper deck. So they said to the people of the upper deck, why don't we just make a hole in the bottom of the boat? So every time we need water, we could just get the water from that hole. If the people of the upper deck leave the people of the lower deck to do this, accept their justification, their thinking, their rationale, all of them will drown. But if they stop them, they do their job, being that immune system on this particular ship for this parable, then they will all be saved, okay? So you cannot leave people who are doing wrong to their own devices, regardless of the justifications they may give for their actions, or otherwise we will ultimately all suffer and all drown. It is one of the prophetic characteristics to be haris, to be eager for the khair and the good and the salvation of others. Not doing so shows how low the status of Allah's commands is in our heart. If you love someone and you love something, then their word means something. And when you see that word, that command being violated, it should hurt in your heart. It should stir something inside of us. If it doesn't, that means Allah's words have no place in our hearts. And this is when the punishment becomes generalized and affects all people. And just look at our situation today. Okay, with that, let's go on to verse number 80. Verse number 80, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَرَى كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتَوَلَّوْنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَبِئْسَ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لَهُمْ أَنفُسُهُمْ أَنْ سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ وَفِي الْعَذَابِ هُمْ خَالِدُونَ. Which means, and now you can see many of them taking the unbelievers instead of believers for their allies. Indeed, they have sent forth evil for themselves. Allah is angry with them, and they shall abide in punishment. Okay, so here it's saying that you see a lot of the people from, the followers of the Jewish community here. You see many of them befriending those who disbelieve. Now, there are two different interpretations that I found in the various books for who are the ones that disbelieve. Are they the mushrikeen? Are they the kafirin? So it's actually, or the munafiqeen rather. So here, Ibn Kathir mentions that Mujahid, one of the great mufassirin, he says that here those who disbelieved refers to the hypocrites. So the Jewish community was befriending the munafiqeen in Medina, those that had claimed to be Muslim, but in fact were munafiqeen or hypocrites, were really not Muslim at all inside, but they just wanted the outer protection of Islam in Medina because it had become the dominant religion there. Maududi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says those who disbelieved is a reference to the mushrikeen. Okay, so there are two interpretations that I found, and if anyone else has something they want to share, please do so. But I found one of Ibn Kathir mentioned that this refers to the munafiqeen, and Maududi and Sheikh Zuhaili and their tafasir saying that this refers to the mushrikeen. So Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions this to be a reference to the mushrikeen. I just want to give you some insight into that. He says that if the Jews had been sincere believers in God, prophethood, and revelation, they would naturally have taken the side of the Muslims, because the message of the Muslims, the Quran, was a natural continuation or an affirmation of what was true in the scriptures that the Yahud had. So it was supposed to be that, we're supposed to now affirm this continuation of the series of revelation that we are also part of. They were logically supposed to have sided with the Muslims, who were believers in these teachings as well. But the Jews were a strange sort of believers in the book. They sided with the mushriks against the Muslims in the battle between the unity of God and shirk. Moreover, they professed to believe in prophethood, but took the side of those who did not believe in it. Still, many shamefacedly declared that they were believers in God, prophets, and the books. So the Jewish stand really didn't make sense for them to side with the mushrikeen, who were idol worshippers when the Jews were not, who the mushrikeen did not have any revelation, but the Jewish community did. So they were supposed to side with the Muslims from a logical perspective because of the great commonality of belief and tawheed and teachings that were common to the Quran as well as their scripture. So it really made no sense that they went off and sided with the mushrikeen. Many of them turned to the mushrikeen in friendship against the Muslims, encouraged them to fight the Muslims, sided with them. So this supporting of those who were against the Muslims, who were against the true believers of the time, which were the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Sahaba, instead of supporting him, going against him, was one of the worst things they could have done for themselves. You may recall part of the mithaq, part of the covenant, was that they would support the messenger. They would, strengthen him with their support. And they failed to uphold this tenet of the covenant as well. And so this was one of the worst things that they could have done for themselves. They incurred the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for them shall be an eternal punishment, which is what the verse says. Allah is angry with them. And so there for them is an eternal punishment. Okay, let's look at the next verse, 81. وَلَوْ كَانُوا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالنَّبِيِّ وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ ما اتخذوهم أولياء ولكن كثيرا منهم فاسقون. For had they truly believed in Allah and the Messenger and what was sent down to him, they would not have taken the unbelievers instead of believers for their allies, but many of them have altogether rebelled against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So their behavior is in fact testimony to the reality that they are not believers, because belief, iman, then has certain actions that result from it, certain consequences, certain loyalties that are natural outcome of iman and believing. So had they truly believed, they would not have not sided with the believers. They would not have sided with the mushrikeen, those who were against the believers. So they don't in reality believe even in the scripture sent to them, because they have failed to apply its commands, which is what the verse is saying. For had they truly believed in Allah and the Messenger and what was sent down to him, they would not have taken the unbelievers for their allies. So not only is it that they don't believe in what was revealed to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but in fact they don't even believe in what is with them, because what is with them affirmed the signs of prophethood in such clear ways that the Quran says in other places that they recognized him as they recognized their own sons. We gave this example before, that if there was a crowd of people, would you be able to recognize your child in that crowd? You wouldn't have any confusion or any hesitation. You wouldn't have to double check, is this my son or not? You would know. This is how clearly they recognized and knew the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he came at the time that he did. But in spite of that, in spite of because of their arrogance, they did not accept him. So then the verse ends with, but many of them have altogether rebelled against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This complete open rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How did they concoct, or how did they execute this open rebellion? Following their desires. We've been through a lot of their characteristics in a lot of detail in the past couple of weeks, right? Some of which were following their desires, not forbidding the evil, finding loopholes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments, blatantly denying the clear signs of prophethood, then killing some of the messengers, siding with the disbelievers against the believers, transgression upon transgression. So they incurred the inevitable that was coming and could not be avoided. And the reality is that many of them, from them, are fasiqun. Okay, let's look at verse 82, and this will probably be the last verse that we do for today. Verse 82. لَتَجِدَنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَدَاوَةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا وَلَا تَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ مِنْهُمْ قِسِّيسِينَ وَرُهْبَانًا وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. Of all people, you will find the Jews and those who associate others with Allah in His divinity to be the most hostile to those who believe. And you will surely find that of all people who say we are Christians are closest to feeling affection for those who believe. This is because there are worshipful priests and monks among them, and because they are not arrogant. A key feature that we're going to spend some time on. So the verse now basically exposes the enemies, right? The greatest enmity that the believers will find will be from the Jewish community and from the mushrikeen, those who commit shirk, those that are idol worshippers. The enmity of all of these people is well known in the Seerah, and unfortunately it is a reality that we are again witnessing today. Just look at what is going on in Palestine, look at what is going on in India. And as for the Jewish community, we have spoken about verses regarding them in some length. Some of you may or may not be aware, they even tried to kill our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, they poisoned him. They even committed magic against him. For those of you that are not aware of this, from books on Sirah, Ibn Kathir mentioned this in his tafsir as well. I mean, this sheds further light on the extent of the enmity that they had. against the Muslim, that they did sihr, they did magic on our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is actually authentically reported in both Bukhari and Muslim from Aisha radiallahu anha, that a spell was put on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam until he imagined that he had done a thing when he had not done it. One day he made dua, then he said, do you know that Allah has shown me in what lies my cure? And do you know that Allah has showed me where my cure is? Two men came to me, and one of them sat at my head and the other at my feet. One of them said to the other, what is ailing this man? And what has made this man sick? He said, he has been bewitched. Bewitched, yani a spell, a magic spell has been done against him. He said, who has bewitched him? He said, Labid bin al-Asam. This was one of the Jewish individuals at that time. Labid ibn al-Asam. He said, with what? He said, with the comb, the hair that is stuck to it, and the skin of pollen of a male date palm. He said, where is it? He said, in the well of Dharwan. The Prophet ﷺ went out to the well. Then he came back and said to Aisha, radiallahu anha, when he came back, its date palms are like the heads of devils. I said, did you take it out? He said, no, Allah has healed me, and I feared that might bring evil upon the people. Then the well was filled in. So this is an authentic report about how a Jewish individual by the name of Labid ibn al-Asam actually had a magic spell done against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And subhanAllah, this is one of those realities which is very alluring and unknown to us. Very, it has this charm, but it is haram and it is real. It still happens. Its effects are real. And if there was anyone that would not, be affected by it, if it was false, would have been our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But in fact, it is true. It happens, just like disease happens. No one can deny that. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became sick in the same way. He also, like a sickness, came under the effect of magic. So this is just to highlight a point that we had not mentioned about some of their deeds, actually, that are included. And a beautiful thing that is mentioned in this verse is that you will find that of all the people, the closest to those that feel affection, the closest, the most affectionate, most friendly people that you will find to the believers are those who say that we are Christians, the Nasara. The closest to the believers are these people, because among them are Qissisin and Ruhban. And we're going to speak in a minute about what it means to be Qissisin or Ruhban. Who are these people? Now, as for when or about whom this verse was revealed, Ibn Kathir reports a narration from Ibn Abbas, which says that this was revealed with regard to Najashi, the Negus of Abyssinia, the Christian king, and his companions, when Jafar bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh, recited the Quran in front of him in his court, and they began to cry to the point where their beards became moist. But Ibn Kathir, after mentioning that report, then mentions as well that this report is problematic because this verse that we're talking about, the verse that we just recited, verse number 82, is a Madani verse. It was revealed in Medina. And the incident about Ja'far radiallahu anh, reciting Quran in the presence of the king in his court is actually something that happened before the Hijrah, right? So it could not have been this incident. So Qatada, the great scholar, he says this report or this verse is referring to Christians who were on the deen of Isa alayhi salam. And when they saw the Muslim, when they heard the Quran, they converted without any hesitation whatsoever. Ibn Jarir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says it refers to people, any people who have these characteristics of responding to the message of the truth when they hear it, regardless of whether they were from Abyssinia or not. It appears to be, anyone who responds to the message of the truth, then this verse can apply to them, regardless of exactly who they were. Wallahu alam. So the mawadda that is cited here is because of the softness of the hearts that Christians have, which is actually revealed in another verse as well. In Surah Al-Hadid, verse number 27, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about them, about the followers of Isa alayhi salam, ثُمَّ قَفَّيْنَا عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ بِرُسُلِنَا برسلنا وقفينا بعيسى بن مريم وآتيناه الإنجيل وجعلنا في قلوب الذين اتبعوه رأفة ورحمة. Then we sent, following their footsteps, our messengers, and followed them with Isa, the son of Mary, and gave him the Injil. And we placed in the hearts of those who followed him compassion and mercy. So this verse is talking about the followers of Isa alayhi salam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed in their hearts compassion and mercy. So they have this mawadda, they have this affection. And the reason cited for this is because they have present in their ranks قسيسين ورهبان. Okay, ولتجدن أقربهم مودة للذين آمنوا الذين قالوا إنا نصارى. You will find the most affection to the believers, those who say we are Christian. And you will see that the reason for this affection, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirms in Surah Al-Hadid, which we just recited, is because among them are Qissisin and Ruhban. Now, what are Qissisin and Ruhban? Qissisin are the khatibs, or their scholars who exhort to goodness, and the Ruhban, which is plural of Rahib, Ruhban, or plural of Rahib, which means abid, yani a person who is worshipful, a worshipful servant, which comes from Rahba, which means khawf, right? So these are worshipful servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who along with their ilm, along with their knowledge, they also have ibadah. So they just don't have knowledge, they're actually also worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. And then there's an element of humility. They are not arrogant. They're not arrogant, and this is a critical aspect for following the truth, for accepting the truth, and for following it, is that they actually do not become arrogant in the face of truth, rather they embrace it fully. So inshallah, with that, we will conclude for today, and we'll inshallah continue with a brief recap, and then on to verse 83. So inshallah, I hope you will all tune in again tomorrow. Until then, please remember us all in your prayers, and have a blessed rest of your day this Ramadan. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdika la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.